So it'll flash up on your screen now to say that we're recording. And I am just going to start and do a very, very brief introduction. And then I'm going to hand it over to Marie. So I'm John from Donegal Volunteer Centre, and my colleague Eamon will be in the crowd there somewhere. It's over 3 screens at the minute, so I'm not going to go looking for him. So myself and Eamon and Damien, we deliver Donegal Volunteer Centre, and we do, I suppose, our function is to work with volunteers in the community and to work with groups across Donegal, just to give them access to information around making their volunteering offering better, or whatever other supports it is we can provide. We always seek to partner in all of the work that we do. So that is why at Eamon's instigation, we would have contacted Marie from the Domestic Violence Service to come in and do a talk for us. Then we thought, I suppose it's such an important topic that we should partner with the other agencies. So we would like to acknowledge Inishowen Development Partnership, Donegal Local Development Company, and the PPN, who all helped us share the message that the session was going on today. And it's just, I suppose, a testament to the amount of connectedness and the amount of work that is through all of those sessions, is that we actually have 99 people on the call, with just a few emails really being sent out to prompt people to register and come in. And I think, Marie, you can take solace from the fact that so many people are interested in being better informed about the topic of domestic abuse. It's a testament, I suppose, to that community spirit, and the fact that we all recognize, maybe as people that are active in the community, or people that are out in the community, or that are involved in community services, that we might be that first line where people emerging from COVID lockdown, or emerging from whatever situation they're in, will interact with. And I know it's something that we're conscious of, that we try to deal with the person and the issues that they present with. So I know from a volunteer centre perspective, we're delighted to be able to access that information so that we can be better informed for our groups, and equally we can help better inform the other groups that are out there. So Marie, if that's okay, I'm going to hand over to yourself, and we'll get started.
Thank you, John. Can you hear me okay? I just want to add, on behalf of our service, a big thanks to John and the Volunteer Centre, because there's been quite a lot of work has gone on in the background, and it's made our job so much easier just to be able to turn up today and do a presentation and to have an audience there. So thanks, as I say, for working in partnership, and hopefully this will be the first of a few occasions that we can come together. I'm actually going to share my screen, which we did do a run through this morning and it worked, but I'm always nervous when it comes to this. So hopefully, can you see that?
Sorry, that's working, Marie. Thank you.
Okay, right. No, that's grand. So basically what I'm going to do on this presentation is to take you through a walk in terms of looking at maybe recognizing some of the signs of domestic abuse. And I'm aware that for some of you, you're working not necessarily directly with the main victim, but you might be working with children, you might be working with other family members who are concerned. So it's to kind of try and do a general overview and give you an idea from each of those perspectives what you might be looking for. And so it's just, it's not too long a presentation, but as John was saying, if there's questions that you want to ask or clarification, pop the comments in the chat and we can cover those as well. I just want to give a slight warning in terms of the topic can be a bit emotional, and it may trigger things, either for yourself personally or for the clients, when you're thinking of clients that you're working with. So just be aware of that and just look after yourself while you listen to the presentation. There are 2 short videos within it. They're very short, they're only about a minute each, but I think the impact can sometimes be a little bit powerful. So just to be aware of that. So this is the presentation then, and I'm going to start by looking at maybe 3 areas that are probably more known in terms of domestic abuse. These are the ones that seem to get the kind of the media attention, or this is probably what you're more familiar with when it comes to looking at domestic abuse. The first one there in the top right-hand corner, probably the last one in here, is around physical abuse. And this is probably the one that people most associate with domestic abuse. And in fact, the terminology domestic violence, I think, tends to conjure up physical impact. And that's why many organizations have moved away from that terminology and have tried to use terms such as domestic abuse, because it is more around a pattern of different types of behavior. It is not just one type of physical assault. But certainly physical assault's the one that maybe the guards are called out to. And these are the cases that tend to come into our service in terms of refuge accommodation, particularly from the likes of the guards or the hospital A&E. But there are other types of domestic abuse and other ways in which abuse can happen within the relationship. And the two other main ones that people might know of are sexual assault and violence. And then sometimes you'll witness financial abuse, often seen in terms of poverty or children maybe not being fully fed, coming through as neglect. And yet one member of the family, usually the abuser, can be very well dressed, has a brand new car, the family seem to live in a big house, but actually there's no money there for running costs or anything. And this can also be picked up in terms of colleagues at work who might be in a domestic abuse relationship, who are earning the same salary as you are, but can't afford to buy a cup of coffee, often dodge going out to lunch with work, might not meet up after work for anything. So, you know, these are all things, because very often what happens is the victim in a domestic abuse relationship with finance is having to provide receipts and justify everything that she spends, even if it's her money. So shopping list, everything has to be receipted. And obviously for things like buying coffee or casual purchases, she can't justify those to the abuser, and so they don't happen. So this is a way in which very often women can be out working and seem to have access to freedom and still be completely controlled within the relationship. So these are the three main types. And if you look at the statistics, a lot of the time, this is what they focus on. It's, you know, since 1996, we've been monitoring here in Ireland, 230 women have been killed. 60% of those were actually killed in their own homes. And this is why domestic abuse is seen as being a gendered crime, because for women, the highest risk of being killed is actually in the home. For men, the highest risk of being killed is outside. It tends to be strangers in terms of, you know, random attacks or fights or, you know, on the streets. But for women, the biggest risk factor for being killed is actually within the home. So for them, domestic abuse is actually quite a serious crime. It's one of the crimes which has the highest rate of victimization. In other words, it's the crime that the guards are most likely to be repeatedly called out to. It's not just a one-off incident. There are lots of situations where, you know, it just becomes an ongoing crime. The perpetrator continues the action, even when there are things like safety orders in place or protection orders, or he's been barred from the house. There is still a repeat nature of it continues going on. So it's very hard for victims to actually get away from the perpetrator. And as you see the figure at the bottom there, 1 in 4 women in Ireland who's been in a relationship has been abused by a current or former partner, which ties into why the risk is so high. You know, it is within the domestic setting that women seem to have the biggest difficulty in terms of being at risk of a crime. But there are other areas of domestic abuse, and you've probably seen in the media, there's been a lot of focus in more recent time on emotional abuse, called coercive control. And that's the legislation that's come into place, but it's made up of a range of different factors. And one of them, particularly for Donegal, that's a key element, is the rural isolation piece. So because rural Donegal is so large, many women tend to be quite easily isolated from their support networks. And this can be a gradual undermining process where the perpetrator is slowly removing the support network, slowly making it more and more difficult for family members to access, doesn't want visitors coming to the house unannounced, doesn't want mother turning up, you know, once every week. He now wants it down to once a month. He wants her living within his family support structure, doesn't want her mixing with friends, just wants her to stay with family members. So very gradually over a period of time, a woman can move into the county and quickly become quite isolated or totally dependent on his family and his support structure. And one of the biggest challenges we have for women coming into the refuge, trying to get out of relationships, is very often they don't have a support network to kind of enable them to move on. And that's one of the key factors why many victims of domestic abuse tend to stay in the relationship. It's where do they actually go and who's going to support them is one of the issues. And alongside that, we've mentioned the behavior. So the isolation is part of that control behavior. Another element then is around just everything that she does is controlled. So you have this, what she's going to wear today. Is she going to wear makeup or not? Is she going to wear that particular outfit or not? Where is she going? Who is she going to see? When is she going to be back? How much is it going to cost? How many miles is she going to do? Where are the kids going to be when she does that? So every movement that she does has to be accounted for. And this, particularly with technology now, this harassment almost can be a lot more insidious, because now we've had clients who've been told, you need to take a video, you need to FaceTime me when you get to that place so I can see that you're there. You say you're at work, I want you to FaceTime me now so that I know you're at your desk when you say you are. And a woman recently went to visit the solicitor and actually had to leave her phone on her desk at work because he had a tracking device on it, so he would have known where she was going. So the control around behavior and the pattern of where she's going and what she's doing becomes kind of quite insidious, and it actually takes over her whole lifestyle. And it's very difficult, and it has been in the past, very difficult to explain this to somebody. How can you explain just a one-off thing about, oh, he doesn't like me wearing too much makeup, as being a form of domestic abuse? And it is difficult to explain that, but it's in the context of what else is being asked. And it's in the fact that it's part of a pattern of behavior. It's not the only piece of the behavior. So very often when we look at signs and we look at what is going on in people's relationships, it can be quite difficult just to take it from one or two events. But the more you get to know people, and particularly for community projects, so we're meeting people coming in and out all the time, the more you can get to know the person and the more you begin to hear of these different types of patterns of behavior, the more then the red flag can begin to fly for you, because you are looking at a range of different small things, but different things all coming together. And the impact of this, the impact of being isolated, the impact of having the behavior being controlled, is you end up with someone who becomes quite low in their self-esteem. They're repeatedly told that they can't do anything, that they're nobody without him, that, they're lousy parents, that if he wasn't there, the children would be lifted, they would go to social work. And all of these threats begin to undermine the self-esteem and confidence. And again, you might see that with people coming in, particularly parents who don't seem to have any confidence, who are really lacking in terms of being able to make a decision, having to run every decision by their partner, not being able to sign things or do it without having to take it back and let him see it. So a lot of this is around, you're beginning to see the impact of the behavior over a period of time, and you're beginning to see that it's this accumulation of lots and lots of little things happening. What I'm going to do now is just show you this is a video that was put together by Scottish Women's Aid. And it was put together as part of their series on explaining what is coercive control. And there are many different elements to it. But the one in this short video is just going to focus on the piece I was talking about around communication and that harassment within sort of social media. So I'm hoping that it's going to play.
From the outside, we look like the perfect couple, a teacher married to a doctor. But inside, I feel like a hostage. He told me who I'm allowed to talk to and who I'm not allowed to talk to. And then he acted like it was all just a joke. It wasn't. He's deadly serious. He gets the kids to tell him who I see and where I go. He complains that I don't call him enough, then that I call him too much. He gets into my email and deletes things, and he sends messages from my account.
You're a useless mother. You get everything wrong. You're losing it.
He told me if I ever try to leave him,
I'll cancel your visa. You'll have nowhere to go. You'll bring shame and dishonor on the family. You'll never see the kids again.
I'm trapped. What have I done wrong?
Coercive control is against the law. It's a pattern of behaviour that's not obvious at first, but does real damage. And it's a crime.
So that video there, and the reason I chose that one out of all of them was because that case of threatening about the visa and also immigration status is coming up more and more in clients that we're actually working with. And we're finding that actually, you know, that can be one of the biggest factors in terms of women feeling that they can't leave the relationship, because a lot of what he's saying is true. You know, their right to be here in this country is tied into his visa arrangements. So, you know, even though we do work and it takes a long time, but we do work closely with immigration, it's obviously a very controlling tactic that works very successfully. And certainly, I think once social work become involved, it can become even more complicated then, in terms of her feeling under huge pressure to actually resolve the issue within the relationship and make it work, rather than to leave and try and set up on her own. So that's one of the factors. And there are other videos if you want to go and have a look, you know, on YouTube or on, certainly with Scottish Women's Aid have done a couple, just to get an idea of the other factors that come up in terms of coercive control. So this leads us on to the factor of, you know, why does she stay? And as you can see, that balance there, that 25%, is really just to say the factors have to be weighted to the point that she feels she can actually leave. A lot of the time, there are sort of very practical reasons why she feels that she can't leave, and there are also then the emotional aspects that kind of tie her into the relationship. So at a practical level, we've begun to look at some of those. Economic dependence is one of the real big factors, not just in terms of money and finance, because they can be sorted out, particularly in terms of claiming benefits in her own name, getting child benefit moved into her own name, or just even moving her work income into her own account. But it's housing. Like, there is very little affordable housing in Donegal, for example. So for someone to actually have to take on that responsibility and look at private rented, and the private rental market, for any of you involved in the affordable housing system at the moment, you'll know that the cost of rent has gone up hugely over the last 12 months. So a lot of women now at this point are not in a position where they can almost take on their own level of housing, unless it is kind of county council social housing. And there are waiting lists there for 2 or 3 years. So economic dependence becomes a real factor in terms of women not being able to leave a relationship. The second one then is the fear of losing the children. You know, and a lot of threats that abusers use is that they will get social work involved, and social work do have this reputation that once they're involved, that they're here to remove children, that they don't want them staying in relationships where there is domestic violence, or then they begin to look closely at people's parenting, and people can feel very threatened and unsupported. So for a woman who is quite isolated already, who doesn't have access to maybe family or friends as a support structure because of the isolation, and who is now being threatened with the state agencies stepping in, has no option of kind of getting economic independence, and possibly doesn't have a place to live. These are all very practical reasons for her as to why she wouldn't be able to leave the relationship. On top of that, then you've got an emotional level of support that's kind of tying her into the relationship. And that is, you know, he has told her that she's insecure, you know, she wouldn't be able to cope without him. If people are here from other countries or even from different counties, if you've married into a relationship here, you're dependent on their local knowledge, you're dependent on their friends, their family support structure to kind of get you through and navigate you around this area. So, you know, there is a practicality there that you feel you can't do it on your own, you can't make your own friends. And then the feeling that actually he's not really a bad person, you know, he's got an addiction problem, or he had a bad childhood himself. He's having a tough time at work. It's stressful. We've been through COVID. It's just exacerbating things. The children are just getting to be really annoying at this particular point. You know, they're just at that age. So, you know, there is a kind of a need and a want to help him and to stay, and feel that she feels that's part of my role in the marriage. A lot of, you know, pressure to stay loyal to the marriage, a lot of pressure coming from outside family members And especially, again, if they're in other countries, because they kind of feel, well, at least if she's married, we know where she is and she's safe and she's supported. If she's on her own, then, you know, she's even more isolated and they'd be worried. And there is this kind of myth in believing it's best for the children. And I say myth because you wouldn't believe the number of women we have in our service who are in their 60s and 70s, whose children who grew up in domestic abuse relationships have now become abusive towards the mother. So that's the pattern of behavior that they were exposed to. That's their attitude in terms of life, but they've also been trained how to deal with their mum, you know, and that's all they know. They've witnessed dad doing this and now they carry this behavior on. So it is not in the best interest for a child to be brought up in that environment and to have to stay in it. And in fairness, now there has been a lot of work done, and you'll see some of the work coming up next with Bernardo's in particular, the ISPCC, looking at doing work with children who've actually been brought up in domestic abuse relationships. And the final one then, in terms of the emotional list, that's kind of quite high, is this hope that things will change. You know, that this was a one-off incident, it's never happened before, or, you know, it's only happened, but it was a long time ago. He said he's really sorry. We can go back, we're going to make things change and things will happen differently. And the reality is a lot of the time that doesn't happen, as you know. But it is a belief, and I suppose when you're in a relationship, it's very hard to believe that somebody you started out, you know, caring for and loving in a relationship can suddenly turn against you. So that there has to be a justification in most people's minds as to what's causing this. And unfortunately, that then can lead people to think that they can change the person or that the person will change for them. So these are all, you know, and that's probably the biggest question a lot of people ask in terms of domestic abuse. Why does she stay? And as you can see, the numbers of reasons there are very complex and very real. So, you know, victims are not just making excuses or not facing up to reality. The fact is they are facing up to reality, and this is what they're being faced with. So these are factors. And if we look at the whole, I just want to spend a little bit of time going into a bit more detail around just how the coercive control works in a process that we call entrapment. Because what it starts off as is a series of conversations that actually on the surface, and you might hear clients or people you're working with say this, he starts off, say, for example, looking at makeup, and he'll say, you don't need makeup, you're naturally beautiful. And how can you criticize, you know, a general comment like that? But what happens in terms of domestic abuse and what happens in terms of coercive control is that those commands or those subtle innuendos, if they don't work, if that statement doesn't persuade her not to wear makeup and she decides to go out, then the ante kind of ups a little bit. So instead it's now, why do you wear your makeup like that? You know I prefer it when you don't. So now it's getting into a state of, this is what I want, this is what I like, you need to do this for me. So there's a little bit more pressure on her, and every time now she wants to put on makeup, she knows that these are the kind of comments that she's going to get from him. And a bit like a teenager then, where you sometimes get them sneaking out the house not wearing makeup and having to put makeup on afterwards, or having to get to work and go into the bathroom and put makeup on, or having to go to the bathroom at the end of a working day and take it off because he doesn't like her being out with it. And then if she's still wearing the makeup or having to go out, say, to a wedding or a family occasion where she feels she has to wear makeup, then he can get quite aggressive in terms of his threats. You know, I can't let you go out looking like that. People think you're a whore. You leave me no choice. And at this point, the relationship can become quite violent. And if he feels that he's not getting his point across, then obviously this is where it can kind of opt. So a lot of the time, these commands, it's not actually what's being said, but it's the implication behind them as to what will happen if she doesn't do it. And it goes through about the other ones as well, because the second one there is actually quite common. You know, women are getting repeated texts and calls, you know, and he's saying, but I'm just worried about you. I just want to know where you are. And again, how do you argue with that? But if you're working with a client, you know, and they're constantly having to keep looking at their phone and saying, oh, I just need to tell him I'm with you. And then 10 minutes later, she's having to text and tell him that she's still with you, you know, then there might be something to start asking about that. Because then it ups to that kind of, if she doesn't answer the text, what happens? You know, you didn't answer it. So now I think something might have happened to you. So, you know, you need to start answering your texts the moment I send them to you. So she knows that there's a threat behind this now. That's why she's having to respond every time. She can't just switch off the phone and ignore it. And then it becomes that threat. If you don't answer it immediately, I'll have no choice. But I'm going to be coming back from the pub or I'm coming back from work to find out where you are. So she knows, even at the first one, I'm just calling and texting you because I worry about you. She knows actually if she doesn't follow that through, that this is where it's going to get to. So again, a lot of women will seem to be, you know, kind of almost not being submissive, but doing things to placate him. And you might be questioning that, you know, why you just keep answering those texts, just ignore him. But actually, the reality is she knows the pattern of behavior. She knows the way that it's going to go, and she knows the threat that's going to come at the end of the day if she doesn't do that. So, you know, yes, she is placating him because actually that's the safest way for her to avoid being in a situation where she could be assaulted or something more serious. And the last one is just another one. Again, kids often get dragged into the middle of it, you know, and the difficulty with this one is, you know, he'll challenge the way that she disciplines the children. You know, it might start off, I love the funny way you talk to your kids, but then it's like, kids are walking over you. I'll need to do the disciplining. And then the last one, you have no control over the kids. You're a rubbish mom. I'm going to deal with them before social services get involved. And the reality is, and I've heard this said, you know, social services might get involved and then decide, actually, he's the better parent because he's the one that disciplines the kids. And, you know, you're trying to explain in a domestic abuse relationship why he might be the one that disciplines the kids and what that really means and what's really going on behind the scenes in relation to that. So again, they're kind of factors to have a look at. You know, how many times have we made judgment calls about how people parent or how she manages? And do we actually know what's going on behind the scenes in relation to that? So that's kind of what we look at in terms of entrapment. And one of the things about coercive control is that it is a process. You know, it moves over time, and, you know, it is all about control. And if she slips and she doesn't get controlled by any of these first interventions and subtle innuendos, it then moves on to the next level and the next level. So it is a process in terms of, as I say, entrapment and threats, and that's how it works. And I mentioned there about children. So the next, what I want to talk a little bit about, what we say about children and domestic abuse is that they don't witness domestic abuse, which is what we used to say. What we say now is they experience domestic abuse. They experience it slightly differently, but they experience it as fully as the main victim within a domestic abuse scenario. So there's been a lot more work, I think, put in place, and particularly Bernardo's and ourselves and many of the other domestic violence services are working in partnership to put together programs of support specifically for children that have been through domestic abuse. And some of the services down the country have been doing this program. And what Bernardo's wanted to do was actually capture the words and the language that children use to describe domestic abuse and their experiences. And this is only a 1-minute video, is the synopsis of that. There's a fuller video that looks at it. So this is a synopsis, and it's spoken by children, but it's the words that children use to describe how domestic abuse impacts on them. So I just want to play that for you.
It is shouting, name-calling, crying, and sometimes even punches, bruises, and blood.
It gets louder and louder. They don't think we can hear, but we can, even if we're in the last corner of the house.
We're worried that Mum might get killed.
We hope it will pass and things will be back to normal, but we are still scared thinking about when it will happen again.
It's a really bad feeling in our heart. It feels like it's broken. Sometimes we feel it in our bodies too, and our bones start to hurt.
We find it really hard to stay out of it. We try to stop it, but it doesn't work.
It's our job to protect our little brothers and sisters.
Sometimes we are told whose side we're on. We don't like it.
Some adults think children are stupid, but all children have a voice.
Together, we can paint a better picture.
So I appreciate that that's a little bit hard hitting. I think particularly when you hear children talking about what they've experienced. But the children involved in this project were very keen that their voices were heard, and very keen that adults would understand the language that they use to describe what it is that they experience when they're involved in a domestic abuse relationship. And the programs that we're offering, the TLC Kids, we haven't got it running up yet in Donegal. We are still in the process of trying to get that. So we're just working alongside TUSLA with that at the moment. But the idea of that is to work with young people to kind of explore their emotions and their feelings, what's come up for them, and how they can help to not just handle it, but also to describe maybe to mom who's been involved in terms of her own relationship and the abuse that she's been through, and doesn't necessarily see what's happening to the children. A lot of mothers will say, well, the children didn't witness anything. I made sure they were in their rooms. They didn't see anything at all. But as you heard from that video there, children undertake and hear and absorb a lot more of what goes on in the relationship than we necessarily give them credit for. So domestic abuse is something that cuts across the whole family. It's not isolated. It's not just one person. And many of you will be working with young children. So, you know, this is what they've kind of experienced, and particularly during COVID, they've not had an opportunity to get out and actually talk about their experiences to somebody, you know, a trusted adult, a youth worker, a teacher, or whoever. So, you know, there's a lot of children who've been locked up with this kind of environment and who have not had an opportunity to be able to talk about it. So I think that's an important aspect in terms of moving on to this piece, which is what can community groups do? And we talk about the 3 R's really. So one of the things that, and a lot of what this presentation has been about, is the need to recognize. So domestic abuse is no longer just straightforward, you know, bruises, that's it, report to the guards, or question her. It's now there are all different types of abuse, and not all of it is easily recognizable at first sight. It does mean kind of getting to know people and getting to understand their situation. And then to respond, you know, that you can offer. It's not that we're asking people to take on and deal with domestic abuse, but there are other people that work with it. You know of our organization, you know that the guards are out there, you know that social work are a lot more aware of domestic violence situations now. So a lot of statutory bodies have done quite a bit of training in relation to this. And it is about encouraging a response and encouraging people to reach out and connect within the community. And refer, so know your local services, but also use social media, you know, by attending training and awareness. It's not just here in this presentation, but seeing the names of all the other people that are involved in the training. So if they're near you, you know that they've also experienced this training, you know, is that somebody you can collaborate with and do something locally around getting referrals, or, you know, doing an awareness campaign, or joining together on a social media thing for a particular geographical area. So they're all different things that community workers can do, but the main thing is that you're probably a point of trust for people. So, you know, when people want to talk about anything within the family, and it might come across as something quite benign, you know, this, oh, he's just constantly texting me and it's doing my head in kind of business. You know where that conversation could actually go, and you're willing to hold it. And that's really all somebody wants, is to have that conversation. And then I mentioned our service. So, I mean, there are within our organization a number of different pieces of work that we do with clients, not just specifically around emergency accommodation, which is obviously one of the things that we do. We do have the helpline. It's not just there for clients, it's there for agency people, it's there for community people, it's there to give support and information, even to run scenarios past people, or to ask for support of what people could do. We have the outreach support, which before COVID used to be face-to-face. It's face-to-face at the moment, but only really for emergencies. There is phone support. Most of our clients have an allocated worker, so they can phone them and have connection with them. But we do go out to each of the areas of the county and work wherever clients. A lot of our work would have been home visits and support, just so that we can actually be in a place where it's not a public location. People don't know why you're going there. Court accompaniment is a big thing that we offer. You know, a lot of women need to get support around getting orders. They need to get some level of protection. The guards are very insistent, you know, if they're called out, really it makes their job a lot easier if the person has a protection order or a safety order. So we do a lot of work around supporting clients and agencies and letting them know about information about that. And then attending court if we need to with women across any of the courts within Donegal. And finally, the agency work. You know, a lot of work now, the cases are too complex for us to work with clients individually. We tend to work across agencies. We link in and work quite closely with community welfare, with housing, rent supplement forms you'd have seen for domestic violence is available now through TUSLA and ourselves, the housing assistance payments, legal aid I've already mentioned above. So any of those where there's an involvement with an agency and we can try and cut down on her having to continually tell her story or drag children into different places, we'll try and support clients to do all of that. So the service is quite complex in terms of the range of things. And women come at different stages. So, you know, initially they may want safe accommodation. A couple of years down the line, they might be going through a separation, or there might be renegotiation of child access, which is a big problem and a big area of concern. And one of our new projects we're looking to get up and going is around offering supervised access where that's needed for clients. So, you know, we're continually expanding to meet the needs of different clients as to what they need. So, you know, keep in touch with us and give us a ring to see what's offered. And as you can see, you know, this is the level of calls that we're actually looking at in 2020. And because of COVID, things did change. Like, we don't normally offer that number of support calls, but obviously because a lot of our support was by phone, the number of calls has increased quite a bit. But there's a consistent number of helpline calls. You know, we're getting, I think, every month at least 20 new callers that we've never had any connection with before. And that has been consistent throughout 2020 and for this year as well. And as you can see there, we're, you know, pulling out there the agency and welfare calls. So these are clients who, you know, need callbacks, need to be checked that they're okay, or it's to agencies who are just making, you know, routine inquiries or checking, you know, I have a client, just want to run this scenario by you. The bottom bit, we had more than 10 requests for emergency accommodation. I think that should be 100 requests for accommodation. It was about 120 requests for emergency accommodation last year, of which we managed to accommodate maybe a quarter of those within our accommodation here. And then we used accommodation out in the community. And we do tend to use bed and breakfast and hotels to support clients, particularly if they don't want to come into Letterkenny. And at the moment with COVID, a priority is given to families coming into the refuge, with single women tending to move into other accommodation that we can locate. And just so you get an idea, I know people have this idea of refuge and think it's some kind of old-fashioned communal living. This is the refuge place in Letterkenny at the moment, and these are independent units. So this is an apartment at the top with its own doorway, and then there's an apartment at the bottom with its own doorway. And clients have their own access in and out of the centre. They don't need to come through our building. And as you can see there, in 2020, we accommodated 28 families. The longest stay was 11 months. So it's not, although it is emergency accommodation, obviously for some clients it is not. So, you know, it is longer, more long-term stay. And we are actually in the process of trying to purchase accommodation within the town for longer stay. So we will actually have the two options then of emergency accommodation and also longer stay accommodation within Letterkenny. And because this is an interagency forum, I suppose that this is the main piece of the work that we do. Like, as cases become more and more complex, as the clients you're working with are no longer just straightforward, as we used to say, you know, just a domestic violence scenario, often there are other factors involved. So you've got things like addiction, you've got mental health issues, you've got social work involvement, you've possibly got the guards. If there's sexual assault, you've got SATU involved. Many of our clients are older people, and you might have people with disabilities, so you've got the HSE involved, or you might have young families, and PHNs are the people who are actually going out and spotting some of these scenarios, and we obviously work very closely with the local authority. So these are just some of the main agencies that we work with, and then obviously specific cases might involve linking in with immigration. There could be, you know, language and interpreters, there could be other cultural platforms, different, not just geographic groups, but different cohorts of groups that we work with specific organizations that support them. So we find that you can't do this work in isolation anymore. And I think you're probably finding the same in your own work. So, you know, what we would just ask, I suppose, is that where domestic abuse comes in, that you can think of us in that term of being someone that can work to support you to work with the client, not necessarily that we will take on and take the client away. That we can try and do it across the agencies. And obviously you might have questions about that. We can look at that more and more. So the very final thing I want to do just before I leave you, I know it says thank you and that's a helpline, but I just want to take a quick tour of our website, because I think at the end of the day, we often leave presentations and it's oh, that was great, and it's all gone in one ear and out the other, and I vaguely know it was important what you were talking about, but where do I go now if you want something else? So I'm just going to put that back to English. So one of the things we have there is the website, and you'll see here under resources that there's quick and easy access to useful phone numbers, and also some of the websites that you can go into. And the other piece that we have on the website that might be useful to some of your clients is under information and support. There are lots of questions about whether, am I in a domestic abuse relationship? What would the signs be? What are some of the questions that you can ask your clients? And one of the things about the website that we went to was we looked at the translation option. So here, if you've got a client for whom, say, Polish is their main language, and you want to print stuff out, or you want to just show them the website, you can, and then they can read through the questions in their own language and begin to look at it and understand it. So it's got the two elements there, you know, and you can put it back to English and know what the questions are, and be able to translate it without having to speak the language necessarily. And they can actually have the confidence in something in their own language. So I just wanted to put that back to you there. And I'm going to switch off screen sharing now, if I know how to. And hand you back to John.
Marie, thank you very much. That was very informative. It is, look, it's unfortunately, it's a sad reality that the topic is something that we need to discuss, and that's, I suppose, we need to be open and frank with. And I suppose it's also a testament to the interest out there within the community sector that something happened to our Zoom today, which has never happened before, is that we discovered there's a cap of 100 people who can join any individual session. So I'd like to record my apologies to those who weren't able to join us today. And we will share the recording with them just to make sure that they get access to the information as well. Marie, yeah, look, thank you. It's a very daunting subject, I suppose, as we said, and it's good, I suppose, to see it from that perspective of the, you know, the 3 R's and what it is that we can do as community workers, and to have that, even that one slide that says what it is, you know, the response that we can give. If you're okay with it, I have 1 or 2 questions, and I'll go to those if that's okay. And for everybody else, if you have a question, please just pop it into the chat and we'll deal with it that way. Just with the volume, people putting up your hand, we might not see you. So the first questions come in, Marie, was around working with the legal sector. So just that I suppose people feel that a lot of abuse continues through solicitors after people leave relationships. Have you worked with the Bar Association here in Donegal, or, you know, is there any kind of, I suppose, relationship there, just making solicitors and the legal profession aware of domestic abuse and the implications?
Yeah, we've done a bit of training with solicitors, and we do have a couple of solicitors that we work quite closely with who would be very, you know, aware and supportive. But we are, yeah, we know that there are other solicitors who find it harder. And the biggest problem is it's the judges, actually, because I think the judges direct the way that solicitors work. So a lot of solicitors know things that won't get taken seriously or won't get listened to, so they tend not to bother. And it can be quite hard as well. You might have a solicitor that's very good and very empathetic towards the victim, but actually doesn't go into the courtroom and do anything about it. And sometimes it might be the solicitor who's a bit sharp and just blunt and to the point, who actually goes in and fights your case the best. So it is a bit difficult, you know, trying to work out what's the best strategy to support people. At the end of the day, if you need an order and you can get the order, you know, we will try and support you through that process and make sure that you can do that. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Another question as well that came through was about services for men that are victims of domestic abuse. I don't know if you go into that area at all, or is there a service you could refer people to?
We tend to refer people to, well, Men's Aid Ireland is the Irish, but we also, because we are close to the border, we do tend to work a little bit with Men's Development Network in the north. So, you know, they're the 2 organisations. Men's Aid is obviously funded through TUSLA, so it comes under part of the domestic, sexual and gender-based violence. They are based in Navan. Now they do have a helpline that covers the whole country, and they do outreach, I think, to several counties. But yeah, Derry would, because of its proximity, would be one that we'd work with as well. The other piece as well is we don't just work with victims. We are looking and working quite closely with probation around trying to put together perpetrator programs. And so MOVE, Men Overcoming Violence, would be a program that we are trying to work very closely with to bring and try and lobby the Department of Justice to bring into Donegal. So you're not just kind of doing this piece where you're, constantly picking up the pieces and working with victims, that you're actually addressing the perpetrator behavior as well at the same time. So yeah, they're the two kind of additional supports in terms of men.
Very good. And is it open for men to ring the helpline to get those referral numbers? Because I suppose the Donegal number is probably more widely spread than the men's network. So
no, we do, and we also put on like we do for anything, like we often get people calling who may not even be specifically domestic abuse, and you're passing them on. We would refer on to the likes of the Samaritans, but we would have men's aid number. We would have, and people are sometimes looking for support in other counties, so we would pass them on to support services in other areas of the country as well. So yeah, we have a whole database of phone numbers and stuff that we would be using for anybody who's trying to access the service.
Okay, thank you. Another question that came in was around, I suppose, physical abuse where both partners are engaged in the violence. And you can't tell who the abuser is. Be it, I'm going to use male and female here as the example, I suppose. But yeah, where do you go with a situation like that? I suppose, does everybody seek help independently? Is it the couple, hopefully, that would seek help to maybe address that MOVE program or something?
It depends on the situation. We do a lot of work with the guards, and this will be a scenario they often face. They go out to a particular situation, but they are becoming more and more aware that people lash out and hit out for different reasons, and what we're trying to determine is who, when are you being defensive in a relationship and needing to use physical violence, and when are you being aggressive in a relationship and using physical violence. So they're two different things, and not every time is a physical assault domestic abuse. So, we're not really looking at unhealthy and dysfunctional relationships. We are looking here at patterns of behavior where there is a specific need to exert power and control over another person. And that's usually the determining factor. If two people are just in a dysfunctional relationship and one is as bad as the other, that's not necessarily a domestic abuse relationship. So, you are looking at a definite victim within here and, somebody using methods of power and control, which usually go beyond just physical assault. That's why we try and stay clear of that physical violence and that we are looking at domestic abuse as a pattern of behavior. So, yeah, it's a difficult one. And the guards face it all the time, and sometimes they get a call out and they have to arrest both partners, they just don't have any other choice. And other times they can actually spot what's happening. Because there are different scenarios, and again, the guards will talk through these where the guards turn up, he's been abusive, the guards turn up, and suddenly he presents as this wonderful, charming fella, and she is just losing her head and being really over the top. And the guards do now recognize what she's doing is actually trying to provoke him, so the guards can see what he's really like. So, there's all sorts of different complex dynamics going on within these relationships, and that's why it's very hard to make a snap call in terms of what's actually happening. This is where you need to kind of know the relationship and the people involved. So that would be why social work do the complex kind of assessments, because you can't know on a one-off incident what the relationship is, and people will groom you. That's one of the downsides of it all. You get one person in the relationship who's very good at grooming the agencies, and that's another tactic abusers can use. And that way it makes it very difficult then for the victim to actually access support, because he's already groomed them all and told them, actually, she's mentally unwell, she's very unstable, she tends to just go off on one, so you just need to let her do that. And I'm the poor innocent person here, and I'm just trying to placate her and get her through, because I just want what's best for her. So, as an agency, you'll be up against all of these different scenarios.
Thank you. Another question that's here is around housing. So I suppose the example is given, and I'll just paraphrase it and hopefully paraphrase it sufficiently, is people that maybe can't access your own centre or access your own housing there, that may declare themselves voluntarily homeless, and then TUSLA end up getting involved because the children potentially are at risk of homelessness rather than dealing with a domestic violence issue. Have you experienced that?
We usually find that So the way the council break it down now is if someone is presenting as homeless through domestic violence, we are responsible for housing them. So, you know, even if we are using the same B&Bs and the same hotel accommodation that the council would, and the council would be aware of the clients, the fact that they come under our remit means that it's clearer then that this is domestic abuse rather than just homeless. Okay. So we're constantly having these conversations. Sometimes we might have a client from the helpline and we're saying, actually, it's not domestic violence, this is homelessness. And we'd be referring them on to the council, and it can happen the other way. So hopefully that kind of makes it clearer. So if TUSLA do get involved, they're aware that there are the two issues there. You know, there's homelessness and domestic violence. And we try and work together between the three agencies then to look at it.
So I suppose the message really is for nobody to stay in a situation for fear of homelessness, that there will be support out there.
Absolutely, yeah. We will always try and locate. Now, some people choose then to kind of go to a friend's house or a family. They don't want to go into a B&B or hotel. And I totally acknowledge that, you know, B&B and hotel is not necessarily appropriate. But as I say, we're looking to expand our own housing, and we are looking to link in with other housing bodies. So, you know, I do see people on the screen there from other housing associations. So, you know, Alan, so we will look to connect in with themselves as well.
Very good. Two more that have come in, and if anybody has any additional questions, please just pop them into the chat. One there about what signs to look out for in children or teenagers that may indicate domestic abuse at home.
Yeah, actually, rather than even answer that, Barnardo's have a very good website, and they have a section on domestic abuse, and they have leaflets, on younger children and also on teenagers, which lists out all the different indicators of what you might be witnessing. A lot of it is what you would expect in terms of people acting out, but it can be very difficult to know with a teenager what the reason for acting out is if you don't know them that well. So, I mean, the bottom line is to talk to them, you know, and try and get them to open up. But Barnardo's definitely has a good website and good resource for young people, or for people working with young people. And it's for parents as well, parenting teenagers who've experienced domestic abuse, parenting children who've experienced domestic abuse.
Very good. Well, we'll share that link out when we send out a link to the recording as well. So Marie, thank you for that. Just one more that has come in, sorry. And as I was saying that, one more came in. Just around people that are in controlled relationships, but because the physical violence is absent, they're maybe in denial themselves. Is there a way to help people maybe notice that? Or yeah, notice might be the wrong word. I'm trying to paraphrase it. Yeah, where the physical violence isn't there, but the coercive control is.
It is very different, but very difficult rather. But I suppose, again, it's just by reaffirming to the person who's talking that, because very often they will say things like, am I just being overreacting to this? Or, you know, like, he's texted me 100 times today. Is that a little bit too much? And I think it's just by holding her space or being with her to say, actually, yeah, you're right. If it doesn't feel right, it probably isn't right. So, you know, just to allow her to have that conversation and to open it up. It's very hard if they don't see that as a problem, you know, and we often get that with cases where maybe social work have been called out, brought the client into the refuge, they're not really ready to leave the relationship, they've never looked at the relationship before, and suddenly all of this is new to them, and they didn't see that they were in a domestic violence relationship. So, you know, it's a very sudden and traumatic journey for them to make. It's actually better if it can come more slowly, and that people can have these conversations more gradually and just do a little bit here and there with different agencies. It can actually make it more sustainable to enable them to leave, which I think is good. And I do see, yeah, somebody's mentioned the phone app, Bright Sky Island is a way that people can actually record through an app, say things that are going on, that they can just, like a journal, that they can record things that have happened, and that is a way of kind of building up a picture where it might be lots of very little things that you're not really noticing, but yeah, he's maybe checked the mileage on the car today, he's maybe just put together all the receipts for the last month in alphabetical order so that I know exactly what I bought on a particular day, or he's made me compare, you know, what brand of potatoes I've bought for the last few weeks and why I've suddenly changed to a different one, or why I've gone to a different shop. And each of these things is very small, but if you start journaling them and writing them down, particularly if you want to take a case of coercive control, a lot of it is going to rely on that evidence. And it doesn't look very much in one go, but keep it all collected and in one space. And one of the things you could offer to do for somebody is to keep that documentation for them, so it doesn't have the risk of being discovered by the abuser, you know.
That's fantastic, Marie. Thank you. We are out of questions and we're approaching the 1 hour mark. So I'm going to close down at that, if that's okay with yourself. I suppose just to thank you for the work and the effort you put in today, just to educate us all and give us all that information. Just to everybody else on the call, to thank you for attending as well. It's great to see that there's such a community spirit out there, maybe of people that are interested in finding out about this, so that we're better prepared as people exit lockdown and maybe re-emerge back into community supports, that we're all more knowledgeable and better prepared as to how to deal with that. So look, from the Volunteer Centre's perspective, if there is anything like this that we could offer more of, let us know. We're always keen to engage with different services and partner and offer more talks. Equally, if there's anything kind of volunteer related that we can help with, please do give us a shout. So Marie, I'll give you the final word and then we're done.
Oh, I don't really have a final word. Just I hope you took down the helpline number, which is 1800 262677. And anytime at all, if you're in the north, there is a landline number, which is just 9126267. But we're there all the time. So give us a shout. It's 24/7 really.
Okay. Folks, go to me and Maigaf, and thank you very much. Okay. Thank you.
I'm going to go as well, John.
No, Mary, thank you very much. Do you have the slides in physical format, or are they just in that link?
I can look at that. I think there is a way to download it and I'll send it to you.
Yeah, if we could have them, and the link to Bernardo's as well, just if there's a particular video you want people to see, or a particular section.
I will do it.
Thank you very much.
And everything worked perfectly, Marie.
Great job.
I know, that was lucky, wasn't it? Because my phone system also went down today, which was internet. So I was really panicking that there was something going on there. Right.
We've never hit the limit on Zoom before. So, well done. You're a great sell.
Listen, goodbye.
Folks, thank you. See you all. Right. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.